Imagine standing inside the largest, most heavily guarded museum in the world, in the middle of the night, staring at a single empty iron hook on a dusty wall. The world's most famous masterpiece has completely vanished into the thin air. No locks were broken, no security system were bypassed, no weapons were drawn, and nobody was hurt. The criminals didn't use an intricate network of high-tech gear. He simply used a white canvas, smoke, a basic screwdriver, and an absolute power of blending into the background. Welcome to the Nobody Files, our Sunday-side story series where the stakes are high, the criminals are clever, but the details are completely non-violent. If you love a great high-stake mystery that focuses on the intelligence of a girl, hit the subscribe button right now so you never miss out our weekly Sunday drops. For the next 25 minutes, clear your mind, let the steady sound of the rain block out the noise around you, and step behind the sidelines. We are traveling back in time, over a century ago, to the morning the world went empty. The place is Paris, France. The year is 1911. In this definitive step-by-step account of the theft of the Mona Lisa, the brilliant low-tech couple that took an obscure, forgotten painting and transformed it into a global obsession. To understand how a criminal of this magnitude happened without violence, we have to look closely at the city of Paris itself. At the turn of the 20th century, in 1911, Paris was the undisputed art capital of the world. The streets were filled with bohemians, poets, and radical painters who openly mocked the tradition-rigged institution of the state. At the center of this cultural landscape sat the Louvre, Paris, a staggering fortress of art containing hundreds of thousands of priceless artifacts. But despite its international reputation, the Louvre security apparatus were complete and total joke. The massive building was staffed by fewer than 150 security guards on a given shift, tasked with protecting several miles of interlocking galleries. The guards were mostly underpaid, elderly military veterans who spent their shift dozing off on a velvet chair or chatting with local art students. The criminals who recognized this fatal flaw was an Italian immigrant named Vincenzo Peruggia. Peruggia was a quiet, unassuming 29-year-old handyman, house painter, and a grazier. He was a man who moved through life completely unnoticed by the upper classes of Parisian society. He was hired by a local contracting firm that had been brought into the Louvre to solve a major issue. Visitors were increasingly vandalizing the art. To protect the masterworks, the museum decided to encase its most prized painting in heavy protective glass boxes. Peruggia was one of the specialized laborers tasked with the building and installing these glass frames. He spent months walking the empty galleries after hours, handling the frames and memorizing the exact movement, shift changes, and habit of every single guard in the building. The operation began on Sunday evening, August 20th in 1911. Peruggia knew that Monday was the golden opportunity. On Mondays, the Louvre was strictly closed to the general public for weekly cleaning, maintenance, and administrative work. The only people allowed inside the building were official museum staff, curator, and licensed maintenance contractor. Peruggia arrived at the museum on Sunday night carrying a small canvas bag of tools. Instead of leaving when the shift ended, he quietly slipped into a narrow, dark storage closet, hidden deep within the belly of the Paris, surrounded by old frames and dusty drops cloth. He sat in absolute darkness for hours, listening to the heavy rain beat against the glass skylight of the museum, waiting for dawn. At approximately 7 o'clock on Monday morning, Peruggia stepped out of the closet. He was wearing a loose white canvas smock, the uniform worn by every single maintenance craftsman and technician in the Louvre. To anyone passing by the dim morning light, he looked like a man executing his daily chore. He walked with calm and hurried steps down the grand, echoing marble hallways heading directly toward the Saloon Carré, the prestigious gallery where the museum displayed its finest Italian Renaissance work. He stopped walking. He stood directly in front of Leonardo da Vinci Mona Lisa. At this exact moment in history, the Mona Lisa was not the global icon she is today. She was highly respected by the art scholars, but the average person on the street had never even heard her name. She hung tightly on a wire, wedged tightly between two massive, glittering gold masterpieces by classic painters. Peruggia looked down the long, polished corridor. The palace was completely silent. The cleaning crews were working in a completely different wing of the building, and the nearest security guard was downstairs having a cup of coffee. Peruggia reached out his hand, grabbed the side of the heavy wooden frame, and lifted the 40-pound painting cleanly off its iron wall pegs. He didn't run. He didn't panic. He turned around and walked calmly into a narrow, vacant service staircase that he knew was rarely used by the morning staff. In the dim, claustrophobic light of the stairwell, the sound of the rain outside felt much closer. Peruggia knelt on the cold stone step, took out his screwdriver and went to work. He quickly unfastened the heavy protective glass case and the outer gold frame that he had helped build months prior, setting them gently against the wall. Now, he had just the raw 400-year-old poplar wood panel. It was surprisingly light and compact, measuring only 30 inches high. Peruggia unbuttoned his white canvas artisan smock, pressed the bare painting flat against his chest, and buttoned his fabric back over it. He wrapped his large winter cloak tightly around his torso to hide the unnatural stiffness of his movement. The painting was completely concealed against his body. He walked down the remaining steps to the exit door, but he hit a massive, unexpected obstacle. The door leading to public courtyard was completely locked from the inside, and his master key wouldn't turn the cylinder. Peruggia took out his screwdriver and began aggressively unscrewing the door knob from the wood plate. Just as he pulled the metal knob off, he heard the heavy sound of boots echoing down the service hallway. A museum plumber named Sauvet was approaching. If Peruggia showed even a second of hesitation or panic, the plumber would know something was wrong, and the entire heist would fail. Instead of hiding, Peruggia stepped out of the open, looked at the plumber, and played the role of annoyed, frustrated coworker. He showed Sauvet the detached doorknob, gestured aggressively at the door, and complained that the museum administration had locked him inside his own workplace. The plumber, completely fooled by the white uniform and the calm, frustrated demeanor, took out his own set of professional key, unlocked the door for Peruggia, and wished him a good morning. Peruggia walked out the side door of the museum, stepped directly into the cool, grey Paris fog. He took the detached doorknob and tossed it over a stone wall in a muddy ditch. He walked down the street, hopped onto a public transit bus, and blended perfectly into the morning crowd of ordinary workers going to their shift. He returned to his tiny, drafty boarding house room on the outskirts of the city, slid the ancient painting under his bed, and went to sleep. Back inside the Louvre, the wall remained empty. 4 bare iron pegs stood out against the wallpaper. A whole day passed. Dozens of security guards, cleaners, and the maintenance worker walked right past the empty space, but not a single person raised an alarm. Because the museum was constantly removing paintings to be photographed, restored, and cleaned, everyone simply assumed the Mona Lisa had been taken to the photography studio on the top floor. It wasn't until Tuesday morning, when the museum opened to the general public, that the illusion shattered. A wealthy high society painter named Ruiz Beroud walked into the Saloon Carré with his easel, planning to paint a sketch of the gallery. He stopped in front of the wall and noticed the empty space. Peruggia approached a sleepy guard and asked when the Mona Lisa would be brought back from the photographer so he could begin his work. The guard laughed and joked, "They are probably cleaning her." But Peruggia was impatient. He insisted that the guard check the photography lab. The guard walked up the stairs to the studio. A few minutes later, he ran back down, his face completely pale and his hands shaking. The photography lab was completely empty. The painting was gone. The museum director was immediately recalled from his luxury vacation. The French government ordered an immediate shutdown of the entire palace, and for the first time in history, the doors of the Louvre were locked to investigate a crime scene. The French borders were instantly placed on high alert. Trains were stopped at the border, and every single suitcase on departing ocean liners were opened and searched by police. A light detective arrived with cameras, discovering the abandoned gold frame and the glass case sitting on the stone steps of the service staircase. The news exploded onto the front page of international newspapers, and a massive wave of national embarrassment washed over France. The public reaction was unprecedented. Lines of thousands of people began forming outside the Louvre, not to look at the art, but to stand in silence and stare at the empty, dusty patch of wallpaper where the painting used to be. Their collective obsession with the missing woman began to capture the global imagination. The police investigation was a chaotic mess of false leads and political pressure. Out of sheer desperation to show progress to the public, the detective began targeting the avant-garde art community of Paris. They received a tip from a criminal informant who revealed that radical young artists had been building small ancient stone statues that had been stolen from the Louvre and locked storage rooms by an opportunist thief. The police followed this trail and discovered that the letters led directly to a prominent, rebellious young foreign writer named Guillaume Apollinaire. Apollinaire was arrested and thrown into a cell. During his interrogation, a terrified Apollinaire confessed that he had given some of the stolen statue to a close friend, a young upcoming Spanish painter who was trying to revolutionize the art world. The police launched a raid and dragged that painter into a dark, intense interrogation. He was trembling with fear, crying hysterically on the stand, completely convinced he was going to be deported or executed for the theft of the century. That young artist was Pablo Picasso. The courtroom confrontation was highly dramatic. Picasso and Apollinaire were forced to face each other in front of a strict magistrate. Picasso, completely breaking under the stress, looked at his close friend and screamed, "I have never seen this man before in my life." The judge looked at the two sobbing, eccentric bohemians artists, realizing they were just foolish young men who had brought minor stolen statues and had absolutely nothing to do with the sophisticated disappearance of the Mona Lisa, and dismissed the charge against them. The trail went completely dead. For 2 long years, the police investigation stalled out entirely. The world began to believe that the painting was lost forever. Speculation ran rampant in the media. Some newspapers claimed that the exclusive American billionaire had paid a criminal syndicate to steal the painting for his private underground vault. Others claimed that the German spies had executed the theft to humiliate the cultural pride of the French Republic before a coming war. But the Mona Lisa had never left the working-class neighborhood of Paris. She was resting under a few miles away of the museum, sitting in total darkness at the very bottom of a false-bottomed wooden trunk inside a tiny, cratered room rented by Vincenzo Peruggia. For 24 months, Peruggia lived a perfectly ordinary mundane life. Every single morning, he woke up, made his coffee, and went to work as a painter and glazier. The exact same profession that allowed him to build the protective cases for the museum in the first place. The police actually interviewed Peruggia twice during their routine checks for every single temporary contractor who worked in the Louvre. But because he was so quiet, polite, and completely unremarkable, the detective didn't even bother to search his room. They checked his alibis off a clipboard and walked out, completely unaware that they were standing inches away from the most wanted object on earth. Every single evening, Peruggia would return to his small room, cook his dinner, and lay on his head down to sleep, listening to the rain beat against his window pane night after night, knowing that a priceless artifact rested right beneath his feet in a dusty wooden box. He didn't try to sell her to shady dealers, and he didn't boast to his friend. He just protected the secret with absolute patience. By the late autumn of 1913, Peruggia decided that the heat had finally died down and it was time to complete his ultimate mission. He packed his wooden trunk, carefully placed the Mona Lisa at the bottom, wrapped in layer of canvas, covered it with a pile of old shirts and tools, and brought a one-way train ticket across the border to Florence, Italy. Carefully placed the Mona Lisa at the bottom, wrapped in layer of canvas, covered it with a pile of old shirt and tools, and bought a one-way train ticket across the border of Florence, Italy. He checked into the modest, cheap hotel called the Hotel Tripoli. He sent a detailed letter to a prominent article dealer in Florence named Alfredo Geri. The letter was signed under the mysterious alias Leonardo. It stated that he possessed the stolen masterpiece and wanted to return it to its true home in Italy, provided he was paid a small modest reward of 500,000 riyal to cover his travel and living expenses. Geri assumed the letter was a classic hoax, but he decided to show it to Giovanni Poggi, the esteemed director of the famous Uffizi Gallery. Intrigued, the two men agreed to meet the mysterious seller at the hotel. On December 11, 1913, Geri and Poggi walked up to the creaking stairs of the Hotel Tripoli and knocked on the door, room number 20. Peruggia welcomed them inside and locked the door behind them. Slowly, without a word, he dragged his heavy wooden trunk out from beneath his bed and unlatched the metal buckles, pulling out a collective of dirty clothes, old boot, and regular hand towel. Then he lifted a false wooden floorboard to the base of the trunk. He reached into the dark space and pulled out an object, carefree, wrapped in soft red silk. As Peruggia gently unwrapped the silk, the 400-year-old face of the Mona Lisa appeared in the dim, flickering hotel light. Poggi and Geri were completely paralyzed with shock. They leaned in close, examined the back of the poplar wooden panel. They matched the unique wood grain cracks and identified the official stamped Louvre inventory number. It was undeniably her. In perfect pristine condition, Poggi, maintaining his composure, told Peruggia that they needed to take the painting back to the Uffizi Gallery to examine it under professional studio writing before they could authorize the financial reward. Peruggia smiled warmly, handed the painting over, and said he would wait quietly at the hotel for their return. The moment the two men left the building, they rushed to the authorities. Within an hour, Italian Carabinieri detective burst into room 20. Finding Peruggia sitting calmly on his bed, he was arrested without a single struggle. When his trial began in Florence, the courtroom was packed to the raffle with journalists, photographers, and lawyers from every major nation. The world expected to see a greedy, calculated international art thief, but as Peruggia took the stand and began to speak, the entire public narrative flipped on its head. He didn't deny taking the painting, and he didn't apologize. Instead, he explained his action with a deeply passionate, romantic, and fiercely patriotic heart. He told the judge that when he was working inside the Louvre, he looked around the galleries and saw rooms filled with beautiful Italian masterpieces by Leonardo, Raphael, and Michelangelo. He falsely believed that Napoleon Bonaparte had wrongly murdered and stolen all these treasures from the Italian people during the war of the 19th century. He felt a burning, sacred duty as an Italian citizen to rescue the lady from her French captors and bring her back home to Italian soil where she belonged. He had no idea that Leonardo da Vinci had actually sold the painting legally to the King of France century before Napoleon was even born. The public fell completely in love with the story. Overnight, Peruggia became an absolute national hero in Italy. The public fell completely in love with the story overnight. Peruggia became an absolute national hero in Italy. Women flooded his prison cell with love letters, and citizens across the country started public donation funds to pay for his elite legal defense. Because of his purely patriotic moves and the fact that he had kept his painting in flawless condition for 2 years, the Italian judge gave him an incredibly light symbolic sentence for just 7 months in prison. Upon his release, Peruggia served with distinction in the Italian army during World War I, married and later moved back to France under a different name to open a small, quiet paint shop. Vincenzo. Before Vincenzo Peruggia took her off that wall, the Mona Lisa was just an ordinary painting in a crowded museum room. But the mystery of her empty space, the front page international newspaper headlines, the forced arrest of the geniuses like Pablo Picasso, and the romance of the humble herdsman who kept her safe in a wooden trunk gave her the magic and captured the global imagination. Vincenzo Peruggia didn't just execute a theft, he gave the world an immortal legend. The lady is back on her wall, now inside the Louvre, protected by a biometric security, hidden sensor, and a massive sheet of custom bulletproof glasses. The mystery is entirely solved. The puzzle pieces are put away. Thank you for stepping behind the headlines. With the Nobody Files, do not forget to hit the subscribe button, and I will see you back here this Wednesday for our main investigative series. Stay curious and take care.